I rely deeply on the loving support of my wife, Camilla. But that message rang hollow when headlines exploded across the UK and beyond. Princess Anne removes Camilla's queen title. What began as a seemingly routine royal engagement quickly turned into a full-blown crisis, a public unraveling that played out under the glare of cameras and the stunned eyes of onlookers. Camilla, composed as always, stepped onto the red carpet at a state event, expecting the usual formal welcome. But instead of the anticipated royal acknowledgement, the announcer awkwardly hesitated, referring to her as the Duchess of Cornwall, a title that hadn't been used in years. Camilla's expression faltered. She glanced nervously to the side, her confident smile slipping. When the cameras zoomed in, the cracks showed, and the media noticed. So did the public. Inside the palace, staff scrambled in confusion. Whispers of internal tensions had been circulating for months, but no one expected the fallout to happen so openly, and certainly not like this. Then came the undeniable truth. Princess Anne had acted decisively, using her authority as one of Queen Elizabeth's most steadfast defenders of royal tradition. Camilla hadn't lost her fortune or Charles's affection, but something even more symbolic, her title as queen. For the first time since Charles became king, it was unclear who truly held sway behind palace walls. The timing was deliberate. Camilla's public standing had taken a hit amid rumors, accusations that she'd tried to sideline Kate, and concerns about how much influence she really had over the king. Many warned her she was pushing boundaries, but few expected Anne, the disciplined private royal who typically stayed out of the spotlight, to be the one to finally draw the line. The world wasn't just watching out of curiosity anymore. They were watching because something had fundamentally shifted. The monarchy, already weighed down by scandal, uncertainty around succession, and splintered loyalties, had entered uncharted territory. At the center of it all, Camilla, furious, Anne, unmoving, and Catherine, the future queen, quietly observing, biding her time. This wasn't just another royal drama. It was a full-blown power struggle inside the monarchy. To the public, Princess Anne and Camilla had always seemed to keep a respectful, if distant, relationship, more out of obligation than genuine warmth. But behind the polite smiles, formal handshakes, and carefully managed appearances, there had been a quiet conflict simmering for nearly 3 decades. But before we continue, we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying this video. If you just did, we truly appreciate it. Now, let's get back to the main content. It wasn't a battle fought with open hostility, but one rooted in long-held judgment, hidden resentment, and a clash between preserving tradition and allowing change. Their story had always been haunted by the presence of one woman, Diana, Princess of Wales. Anne had been fiercely loyal to her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and just as fiercely committed to the customs that held the monarchy together. Raised to value discipline and privacy over publicity and performance, Anne had little patience for the media attention that Diana brought when she married into the family. At first, Anne saw Diana as overly emotional and too focused on her image. But over time, her perspective changed. She began to understand Diana's role not just as Charles's wife, but as someone who brought something the royal family desperately lacked: genuine compassion and emotional connection. When the truth came out about Charles and Camilla's long-standing affair, Anne wasn't just disappointed in her brother, she was furious at Camilla. In her eyes, this wasn't just a personal betrayal, but a violation of everything the monarchy stood for. While others avoided the subject or remained diplomatic, Anne never hid how she felt. To her, Camilla symbolized the consequences of putting personal desire ahead of royal responsibility. Even as Queen Elizabeth gradually accepted Camilla, eventually naming her queen consort before her passing, Anne never fully embraced that decision. She followed protocol, showed up to events, and did what duty required. But her emotional distance never softened. Body language experts had long noted the tension between them. No shared glances, no warmth, no meaningful interaction, just the cold, polite distance of two women who had been on opposite sides for years. This wasn't just personal. It was about the institution itself. Anne saw Camilla as someone who had disrupted the monarchy, slipping into its inner circle through scandal and gradually reshaping tradition to suit her own preferences. To Anne, becoming queen wasn't something that should come from a long romantic history. It was a role that had to be earned through dedication, sacrifice, and an impeccable public image. And in her eyes, Camilla didn't measure up. Camilla, on the other hand, had little patience for Anne's icy reserve. She had clawed her way into reluctant acceptance after years of being vilified in the press and rejected by the public. But Anne, she never budged. That unshakable disapproval gnawed at Camilla. When Charles ascended the throne, Camilla believed she had finally arrived. Her difficult path had seemingly led to the ultimate reward, the title of queen consort. But what she failed to see was that Anne had never truly signed off on that outcome. She was just waiting. According to insiders, tensions escalated behind the scenes not long after the coronation. Camilla, feeling empowered by her new role, began to make moves, reworking seating charts at formal events, proposing shifts in charitable initiatives that clashed with Anne's longtime causes, and even hinting at giving more prominence to her grandchildren in the royal narrative. Anne noticed, and she wasn't amused. Palace sources described icy exchanges between the two during a private event at Windsor. Camilla, wineglass in hand, reportedly joked that she was now the true matriarch. Anne, without missing a beat, replied, "You might wear the crown, but that doesn't mean you carry the weight." It wasn't just a clever remark. It was a signal. And that signal has now turned into a bold move. With Queen Elizabeth gone, Anne sees herself as the last true guardian of royal tradition, a steady anchor in a monarchy struggling to maintain its identity. And when Camilla pushed too far, Anne didn't hold back. She made her move. The silent battle between Anne and Camilla was escalating. In royal circles, power rarely comes from loud declarations. It's exercised through subtle gestures, quiet conversations, and carefully worded documents. For Camilla, influence often came through private dinners and seemingly harmless suggestions, often disguised as tradition or modern updates. But for those watching closely, it became clear that she was carefully building her influence behind the palace walls, and her latest move shattered the fragile balance, pushing Anne from quiet disapproval to outright confrontation. The trigger? A bold push to draw her own family deeper into the royal fold. For years, Camilla had kept her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, at a respectful distance from royal affairs. Publicly, they were portrayed as private individuals with no official role. But things began shifting behind the scenes. According to senior palace insiders, Camilla began lobbying for Tom Parker Bowles to be appointed to an official advisory position within the royal household, a role that would give him access to top-level strategists and allow him to weigh in on major royal planning, including matters related to public image and even succession optics. Anne was livid. In her view, this crossed a line, not just because Tom had no royal title, but because such roles had always been reserved for those born into the royal bloodline, not extended through marriage. She saw it for what it was, an effort by Camilla to reshape the royal narrative. And that wasn't all. Camilla had reportedly also pushed for changes in royal protocol, adjustments to the formal hierarchy that determined who entered a room first, who sat where at state dinners, and who held symbolic priority. To outsiders, these details might seem trivial, but within the royal institution, they're everything. Symbols of status, duty, and legacy. Camilla was said to be advocating for her relatives to outrank even senior working royals who had dedicated their lives to serving the crown. For Anne, this was the final straw. She had tolerated Camilla's pet projects, her subtle digs at Catherine, and her ever-growing sway over Charles. But now Camilla was no longer simply bending tradition. She was trying to rewrite it. Anne voiced her fury behind closed doors. In a private meeting, she reminded Charles that titles and ceremonial order weren't just pageantry, they were sacred. Tampering with them for personal reasons, she warned, risked unraveling the very foundation of the monarchy. Charles, ever the mediator, tried to downplay the tension. He insisted that Camilla's suggestions were just ideas for modern improvement, nothing more. He brushed off Anne's concerns as outdated and overly rigid, a serious miscalculation. Anne knew the monarchy couldn't survive if it turned into a platform for personal ambitions, especially from those whose controversial pasts had already tested the public's trust. However well-mannered or accomplished Camilla's children might be, they weren't royalty. And to Anne, the idea of them gaining influence while William, Kate, and their children were carrying the weight of the monarchy's future felt like a betrayal of everything the institution stood for. Those closest to her said she left that conversation with a clear resolve. Camilla had crossed a line. In Anne's eyes, Camilla no longer deserved to be called queen, not when she was using the title to reshape the royal family in her own image. Anne wasn't going to wait for Charles's approval. She was going to act. What was supposed to be a peaceful weekend retreat turned into something entirely different. Balmoral Castle, known for its quiet, windswept solitude and deep ties to royal history, became the stage for a long-brewing confrontation. Princess Anne had called the meeting, and within royal circles, that alone spoke volumes. She didn't typically summon gatherings. She did her duty, kept to herself, and let tradition speak louder than words. So when a direct request came from Anne, one marked by urgency and requiring full attendance, the palace took notice. Charles arrived tired, unaware of just how serious things had become. Camilla, composed but slightly wary, believed she could manage the moment. She had survived worse, after all. Whenever the press turned hostile or whispers about Diana resurfaced, she had managed to weather the storm. But this time, Anne wasn't leaving room for maneuvering. The meeting was held in a quiet drawing room, far from staff and courtiers. Only Charles, Camilla, Anne, and a handful of senior aides were present. No one spoke out of turn. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. With her usual precision, she laid out her case. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a formal argument built on principle and precedent. She presented concrete examples, emails, private discussions, and specific actions, all pointing to a calculated effort by Camilla to shift influence within the monarchy in ways that broke with long-standing tradition and undermined public confidence. Then came the decision. Camilla's ceremonial use of the title Queen would be rescinded in all instances where the king was not present. From that point forward, she would be referred to only by her previous title, Duchess of Cornwall, at such events. Anne followed with a prepared statement, invoking her senior position within the royal family, as Colonel of the Blues and Royals and as Queen Elizabeth II's only daughter, to assert her right to protect the institution's integrity. Charles immediately objected. Charles's voice wasn't firm. It was emotional, almost pleading. He looked at Anne and asked her to reconsider. "She's my wife," he said. "She is queen." Anne's response was cold and direct. "She may be your wife, Charles, but she's hardly the queen your mother had in mind." Camilla, caught between shock and outrage, couldn't hold back. "You're not the monarch," she snapped. "No," Anne said quietly as she stood, "but I'm my mother's daughter, and she trusted me to protect what she built." The room fell silent. Even the aides looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes during the standoff. Moments later, Camilla stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Charles sat frozen, stunned. Anne, always composed and rarely one for theatrics, calmly placed a signed document on the table, gave a brief nod, and walked out without another word. Within hours, internal communications were sent out across the palace to event organizers, media liaisons, and royal staff. The directive was clear. All references to Queen Camilla were to be changed immediately. There was no official statement, no press release. But within days, the change was obvious. Presenters hesitated. Programs were quietly revised. And at her next appearance, Camilla was no longer introduced as queen. She was once again Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall. Anne had made her move. Camilla wasn't brought down by scandal or media pressure, but by someone who had silently watched her ascend and decided it had gone far enough. The setting couldn't have been more elegant. Dignitaries mingled under glittering chandeliers, and the crimson carpet of the Royal Academy's fundraising gala gleamed beneath the flash of cameras. It was supposed to be just another formal evening, one of many public events on Camilla's schedule. She arrived in full splendor, wearing a dazzling tiara and a deep sapphire gown, with Charles beside her. Their smiles were polished, practiced. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Camilla had gone over this moment in her head countless times. A short walk to the stage, a gracious introduction by the host, followed by a brief speech. Simple, routine. But nothing could have prepared her for the words that came next. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall. Not Queen. And in that instant, everything changed. A stunned hush fell over the room, followed by scattered, awkward applause. Camilla froze mid-step. For a split second, she thought she must have misheard. Her expression flickered, almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught it. Her eyes darted to the host, then to Charles, who looked just as blindsided. And in that instant, she understood. This wasn't a fluke. There had been no heads-up, no private memo. This wasn't a rumor leaked to the press or some tabloid invention. It was a deliberate statement, delivered with careful precision. On the sidelines, aides were visibly shaken. One leaned in to whisper to the event coordinator. Another fumbled for their phone. But it was too late. The moment had already gone public. The cameras had captured it all, and the world had just witnessed a royal reset in real time. Seasoned reporters immediately picked up on the shift. "Did you catch that?" one muttered. "They just took her title, out loud." The whispers turned into social media posts, which quickly exploded into headlines. To her credit, Camilla carried on with the speech. Her voice trembled at first, but she regained composure, years of training under pressure kicking in. Still, the damage was done. Every clip, every photo, every caption from that night labeled her with the title she thought was behind her. Back at the palace that night, Camilla was said to be inconsolable. She demanded answers. Staff tried to smooth things over, blaming it on a simple oversight. A clerical error, they claimed. But Camilla wasn't fooled. The wording had been too deliberate, too precise. Someone had made a decision. And she knew exactly who that was. Princess Anne. This wasn't a minor snub. It was a calculated assertion of control, executed not through back channels or press leaks, but through one word on a formal script. That one word was all it took to unravel years of image rebuilding. Opinion columns praised Anne's measured authority, framing the move as a quiet rebalancing of royal values. Social media erupted. The word Duchess was suddenly everywhere. Camilla's startled expression appeared alongside stoic photos of Anne, who looked every bit the enforcer of tradition. But the real impact wasn't online. It was within the palace walls. Without spectacle, without announcements, the internal order had shifted. Camilla had received the message, clear and final. The title she wore had never truly belonged to her. And now, it was gone. Later that night, as she walked back into Clarence's house, the composed exterior she had fought so hard to maintain finally gave way. Camilla exploded with a fury the palace hadn't witnessed since the chaotic days of Diana's media reign. Crystal glassware smashed against the wall. A vase shattered near the fireplace. Her usually composed voice boomed through the corridors as she demanded answers, names, explanations, consequences. "How dare she?" she reportedly shouted. "How dare Anne do this to me in front of the entire world?" According to insiders, the Queen Consort was almost unrecognizable in that moment, crying, pacing, yelling about betrayal. She lashed out at aides, accused longtime staff of siding with Anne and the traditionalists, and even ordered a formal investigation into who had been behind the on-stage introduction. But no one needed an inquiry. It was obvious. This wasn't a slip-up. It was deliberate. And Anne had delivered the blow with brutal precision. Camilla's rage didn't last. It collapsed into despair. She withdrew into her private rooms for hours. The woman who had spent decades fighting to be seen as more than a mistress, who had finally claimed a throne beside the man she loved, had just been stripped of it all, publicly, with a single sentence. Her long uphill journey to legitimacy had unraveled in under a minute. But Camilla wasn't the only one shaken. Sources close to the palace said King Charles, already emotionally drained by the weight of the crown and the rifts in his family, spiraled after the gala. He called Anne, hoping for a calm conversation, but it reportedly spiraled into a bitter clash between siblings, fueled by years of suppressed tension. "You've gone too far," Charles told her. "No, Charles," Anne replied. "You did, when you made her queen." The call ended in silence. Charles spent the rest of the night alone in his library, pacing. He didn't know what to do. Release a statement? Undo Anne's order? Or let things settle and hope the storm would pass? But one thing was clear. If he acted publicly to reinstate Camilla's title, it wouldn't just be a disagreement with Anne. It would ignite a full-blown conflict within the royal family. And it wouldn't just be Anne on the other side. William and Catherine had remained quiet throughout the entire ordeal, but their silence spoke volumes. They hadn't defended Camilla. They hadn't tried to stop Anne. The next morning, Charles received a private message from William. It was brief. "We need to protect the crown, not individuals." The words hit him hard. He understood exactly what they meant. Now he was caught between loyalty to the woman he loved and loyalty to the institution he was born to lead. Camilla had lost the support of the family, and Charles was left with a terrible choice: defend his wife and risk a fracture in the monarchy, or let her slip quietly out of the spotlight. For the first time since wearing the crown, the king had no idea what to do next. Camilla, stripped of status, silenced, and deeply embarrassed, came to a painful realization. This wasn't just about humiliation. She had been strategically outplayed. There were no official announcements, no press briefings, no grand acknowledgement of what had taken place. But the message was clear to everyone. The monarchy had shifted, and it wasn't the king who had pulled the strings. It was Princess Anne. Long underestimated and often overshadowed, Anne had done what no one else dared to do. She didn't seek attention. She didn't stir scandal or fan the flames of palace intrigue. She simply acted, drawing on her birthright and the quiet confidence her mother had entrusted to her. And somehow, through that quiet strength, she did what the monarchy had long needed. She steadied it. Camilla, once seen as a rising royal power, positioned to define her chapter of the crown, slowly faded from the forefront. Her once frequent appearances became more sporadic. The glamorous photo spreads disappeared. Inside the palace, her presence no longer carried the same influence. She was still Charles's wife, but she was no longer the centerpiece of his reign. The title was gone, and with it, the illusion of absolute authority. As for Charles, something shifted in him too. Those closest to the king described a more reserved, introspective figure. He seemed to recognize that the center of gravity had moved, not around himself, but toward the next generation. William, Catherine, Charlotte, and George, poised, admired, and accepted, now represented the monarchy's continuity. Yet it was Anne who had sparked the change. She reminded the country, and the family, that royalty wasn't built on charm or public image. It was founded on duty, structure, and values she had upheld her entire life. And when she saw those values being bent for personal gain, she acted. Within royal circles, her move was quietly hailed as a brilliant act of leadership. It didn't grab headlines, it wasn't flashy, but it cut through the noise. The crown, once dulled by ego and entitlement, had been restored, not through spectacle, but through integrity. And in that decisive moment, Anne didn't just reclaim a title, she reaffirmed what the monarchy was meant to be.